there's got to be a point that we draw the line. So the question I have for you is, and these gentlemen and ladies will have questions as well, and mine aren't that significant, but it would get us started on the right track. Now, his orders or edicts or whatever they are, wanting his wishes to be law, may come down on us. Now, what we've heard your statements and read in your statements is the supremacy clause. And so what I'm understanding, and most of these people, and please educate me when you get a chance here, the law and the supremacy is that the federal law comes down and it's law, so we have to uphold that. Is that correct? That's
a path.
It's a path. All right. Well, if I guess the first questions are mine. If the federal government makes a law that they are to confiscate guns, would you be willing to do that?
No.
Perfect.
That's
what we want to hear. And that right there. That right there allows me to introduce Sheriff Raney.
Thanks, Jeff. I actually didn't originally have a conversation to talk about gun control. It was about something else, but let's get the hot button out on the table first.
Is a bigger hot button.
So the gun control debate. So let me be clear on where I stand and offer you at least my view or my thoughts, my education on about how the system works. And I will tell you, I stand behind every word I have ever written and every word I've said about the topic. So let's go back to our Constitution that it has that we have the right to keep and bear arms. And I am a strong Second Amendment supporter. I have guns. I have written and I have said that I will never surrender my guns, and I don't expect you to as well. And I stand by that very word. But the President has not signed. He has sent down 23, and people sort of misinterpret them as executive orders. So actually in government, for example, the President is the executive branch of government and is vested with the power of the Drug Enforcement Administration. So the Drug Enforcement Administrator reports to the President. And so when Washington passes a law and says we are going to legalize recreational marijuana, then it's within the President's authority to say a direction, an executive order to the administrator of the DEA that we're not going to take action, even though it's against federal law, we're not going to take action to enforce those laws in Washington. Because Congress specifically gave the President that authority to supervise the Drug Enforcement Administration and the executive enforcement of those laws, and so he's passing down an executive order. The President cannot issue executive orders unless Congress gives him the authority to do so. So what he's issued in his 23, and I'll call them recommendations, because he has not signed a single one of them, his 23 recommendations, many of them are good. 15,000 cops on the street to help protect schools, putting together plans so that not just law enforcement, but public safety and school counselors and teachers can effectively respond to school emergencies in a collaborative basis. I can talk about the briefing I got 1 week ago about the response to Sandy Hook and how it was so successful because people responded effectively. I can tell you right here in Ada County, we're not as prepared to respond to that as they were in Newtown, Connecticut. Mental health. Addressing the mental health issues is a very important issue in this community. And it's not his idea, it's many idea. He put one recommendation, I support that. But there's three things we're really talking about that are hot button issues in those 23 recommendations. One is assault weapons ban. You and I don't want an assault weapons ban. Frankly, it's not going to pass. So I don't spend much time on that. But as far as the constitutionality of it, it's already been an assault weapons ban for 10 years that we didn't like. That expired. And that constitutional challenge didn't even hit enough traction to take it into court. So we don't like it, but it's not unconstitutional because Second Amendment doesn't say you have the right to keep and bear assault weapons.
Now you're defining the norms.
Well, No, I'm not. I'm saying that it's not that specific. So you and I don't like that, but I guess to my point is it's not going to happen, really. The NRA has the support right now, and Congress will not allow that to pass. Maybe a slight chance for the magazine capacity ban. So 10 rounds of magazine capacity. I don't think that's going to pass either. But if it does, there's nothing in the Second Amendment that even addresses magazine capacity. So it'd be hard to challenge it. The third one to me is the greatest threat to our rights, and that is the mandatory background checks. Because, let me be clear at the start, we don't know what it looks like. There is no bill that anybody that I know of or have heard, and amongst everybody I heard good a week ago today, I had to sit through Dianne Feinstein.
I'm sorry.
Now,
Thank
now
you.
are you worried about the registration? Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I mean-
Or background check? They're kind of two different things.
Well, the background checks will lead to registration.
Okay, so that's what you're worried about. That's what I'm worried
so-
about, is registration.
Right.
Yeah.
So presumably the background check legislation, which now it only says if you're a federal firearms licensed dealer, you're going to sell a firearm, that you have to fill out the FFL form, Federal Firearms License Form. That essentially registers that weapon with the federal government. If I sell you a gun now, I don't have to do that. And if I sell you a gun at a gun show, I don't have to do that. So that's the loophole that they're trying to close. So I thought, I don't understand the practicality of that. But while in Washington, D.C., which was to go, I was back at a meeting with sheriffs and chiefs of police. Particularly, there was a number of issues, but obviously the Second Amendment issue was a hot button topic. I get to talk to the sheriff there from, the name escapes me, just north of Los Angeles. I presume that that Feinstein's bill, because she's from California and totally clueless, it was astonishing how little she actually knew, would probably be like the California bill. So the California bill says, this is a state law, remember, a state law, so it's a big difference I'm going to lead to there. It says if I sell you a gun, then I have to fill out a form and we both sign it. And if I don't fill out that form and send that in, and that gun is then used by you for an illegal purpose, like committing an armed robbery, I may be civilly and criminally liable because that gun is still registered in my name and it was an instrumentality of a crime. And secondly, your motivation is if you don't register that gun and it's stolen or lost because you didn't register, legal term, title to that piece of property, you don't get it back. But the federal law, whatever that could be, it doesn't make sense because, here's a key, sheriffs don't enforce federal law unless we want to. So, let's say that passes a bill and it's something similar to that, and they say, okay, if you're going to have a gun show down at the Expo, Idaho at the fairgrounds, and everything has to be a background check, my agency wouldn't have anything to do with that. I don't know how that's even enforceable. And even if it's hypothetically enforceable, and the federal government, well, I shouldn't say federal government, because it's Congress, it's your representatives and mine, pass a bill that says you have to register it or these things would happen, there is I think, a very challengeable question there as to whether the federal government can pass some sort of law that inhibits your property right to a piece of property, a title of a piece of property that you own lawfully under Idaho law. And who's going to enforce it? I think it's very, very complicated. And I don't see on the legislation side of it, I don't think they're going to be able to put it together where it makes sense. On the enforcement side of it, I think it's nearly unenforceable. And my position, like most of the sheriffs, and I can't say the chiefs, you know, the division is if you're in a major city, if you're a law enforcement chief, or maybe even a sheriff from a major metropolitan area like New York or Chicago, probably supporting this weapons ban. Because if I am in the heart of Chicago, somebody has a weapon that more often than not, I mean by like 51% or more, it means you're a gang member or you're committing a crime with it. There's a lack of understanding of what our life out here is in the West, in rural states. And that's what was so shocking to me with Senator Feinstein is a total unawareness, and I presume most of you are somewhat familiar with weapons. She said, now I understand that you can take a semi-automatic rifle and put a different handle on it, and it'll be fully automatic then. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And she went on with a few things that was such a stretch about the truth of weapons, about how we use firearms for recreation and defense, and it went beyond that, even talking about some of the gaming that exists for it, which we don't really know. There seems to be some anecdotal evidence that say the violence in video games today, and Adam Lanza was a serious video gamer with lots of, I don't know the word, it's like action or shooter games.
First-person shooter.
First-person shooter games. There seems to be some anecdotal evidence that says our kids get desensitized to violence through first-person shooter games. I don't know whether that's the case or not. But
I think it maybe there's people who have a propensity towards that, and that just is.
Might be.
You know, I think the mental health issues are.
The troops too.
That's what I was going to say. I read that the military actually uses those kind of things to train troops to shoot.
Yeah.
To be able
Get them to shoot.
to get them
It kind of makes
It
sense.
has to do with families. Families need to limit it.
Kinda makes
That's what they
sense.
need to do.
So here's my take on the policy law. Assault weapons ban's not going to pass. Magazine capacity, I don't know about that. But I think the biggest threat is this background check, because if somehow the background check passes, then by sending in that form, it leads to the registration of our weapons. Now when we talk about, and I don't know where you're all at, but I think you're talking about, Sheriff, what are you going to do when they come confiscate our weapons? Knock on our door and confiscate our weapons? It ain't going to happen in our lifetime period. Well, and I'll get there. And the reason that I have not come out and said, oh, you know, if they come and confiscate your weapons, I mean, I'll answer the question hypothetically in a room like this, but if we say, all right, what happens at the day in our kids' lifetime, when I won't be here, that they come to confiscate our weapons, what will you do? That's like saying, you know, I wish our national policy didn't have us going overseas and defending countries other than the United States. So I'm going to fly to Syria and stand at the airport and make sure troops don't come in there. It's too late by that point. Let's fight the real issues right now, which is background checks and registration and making sure that we defend these rights so we don't get to the point of confiscation. And so when statements have been made by politicians and sheriffs in other states particularly, if you know about Sheriff Donahue, I can tell you exactly, because he's a good friend of mine, what he meant. His words were, I won't enforce a law that's unconstitutional. Well, no kidding. Neither will any other law enforcement officer, because it's unconstitutional. That's what we do all the time. So I think it misleads people when sheriffs, and there are very few of them, but they get a lot of recognition for it, stand up and say, boy, I'm going to stand at the threshold and fight for your rights, and the feds aren't going to come in and take your guns in my county. And what I think that does is disarm the citizens of our county and kind of say, you know what, the sheriff's going to take care of me, so I can kind of sit back and I cannot be involved in this issue that's so important for us. And that's why I wrote that article in the Statesman that I stand by every word of. Because in that article I said, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. But there is a federal supremacy clause. And if there's not a federal supremacy clause, why the hell are you and I paying so much federal income tax? Because I'd love to vote to pay less.
because it's taken out of our check.
Exactly. Because it's federal law.
No, because somebody allowed them to.
Well,
But it is law. It's federal law. So,
I think if we're getting into the legality of it, actually, the 16th Amendment that allows for the income tax is in fact an amendment to the Constitution, and as is the Second Amendment. And that's an important distinction because an amendment overrides the preceding document.
but, like I said, I don't want to take off on a tangent. The amount of that tax, we really don't have a say over. I wish we did. So my point is that, so in our system, our representatives in our republic government go to Washington, D.C., as do the representatives of New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago, Dallas, that would like to have some of these weapons banned, and they pass laws in Congress. And the checks and balances of government, which are so important to you and I, because you don't want President Obama issuing executive orders beyond his authority. He's the executive branch of government. I'm the executive branch of government. I'll fight for my rights, I'll fight for your rights, but I very much believe in what our founding fathers established about that balance of power. And to say when Congress passes a law that says, here we're going to infringe upon the Second Amendment rights, and we don't believe that is proper, we have two recourses. One is to get Congress to change the law through the election process. And the other is to challenge that law in the Supreme Court that in the checks and balances of government is vested with the power to determine whether or not laws are constitutional. Because you and I can believe that they are or they're not. We can go back to the abortion debate, and that was one of the similar ones where we had so much passion. The difference is in the abortion debate, there was no geographic congealing of the passions, because we had different religious principles and different beliefs about life and pro-choice and pro-abortion spread throughout all different communities. But in the Second Amendment debate, the kind of good thing we have in a way is that we're kind of geographically centered. Because I don't know, what, guess for yourself. 90% of the people in Idaho, I'm guessing, probably support strong Second Amendment rights and don't infringe upon those. I've heard from the 10% that don't. But that's our system of government. And it's not that we're going to sit back and not do something about it. It's not that we're going to leave. I get offended a little bit, but I realize that long ago when my predecessor, Vaughn Killeen, they talked me into running for sheriff, said the first thing you got to do is develop thick skin. And when people have twisted my words since I wrote that article in the Statesman and follow-up, and they have twisted them every way you can imagine, say the sheriff believes in unfettered federal access. Well, and I know I'm on tape, bullshit. I never said that. I have never said that. I do not believe that. I'll say that to you. I'll say that to any group here. I stand behind everything I've written and everything I've said. What I said is I have strong personal beliefs, and I also have strong professional beliefs in the way our government was formed and the checks and balances that exist therein. And there are ways to protect our rights. And the first thing we need to do is up front, fight for those properly through Congress, through if the president issues an executive order that is outside of his authority, that we challenge that, and the Supreme Court is there. And if you remember, he just made an appointment out of session that was not within the law, and the Supreme Court very quickly ruled that was outside of his...
Somebody's car. It was you.
The Supreme Court very quickly ruled, said you can't do that. So there's many remedies, but I do not believe in nullifying Congress. I do not believe in nullifying the Supreme Court, or otherwise not taking the best action that within the framework that our founding fathers set for our government protects those rights. And as early, not late, not standing at the door of confiscation in our child's days, but right here and right now. That's what I think.
Well, thank you for sharing those views on the Second Amendment.
Was that county?
Okay, any questions?
The county you were thinking of, was that either Kern County?
Kern County, yes, thank you.
Ventura? Okay.
Yes. Sheriff Youngblood, Donnie Youngblood, Kern County.
What do you think of the rumor that Homeland Security is stocking up on ammunition?
No, that's just Homeland Security has a lot of enforcement action. They have a lot of cops in Homeland Security. So they have ammunition the way that we stock up on ammunition. It's really hard for the sheriff's office to get ammunition because you're all buying it up right now. We all get it from the same place.
But it was a billion rounds, is what they were talking about, which seems like a lot.
And hollow points. Why do they need hollow points?
Yeah.
We carry hollow points. We carry
You
hollow
can
points in all of our
utilize
guys.
You guys do?
Absolutely.
I used to shoot hollow points, but it was at ground
Expensive.
squirrels.
Yeah. And it's the most effective round. And, you know, it's
Harrison and Jim.
the...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and ask the question that people don't like to answer, so we'll see how it goes. Back in the 1850s, in 1850 I believe, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. Said if a slave escaped to a free state, they had to turn him back over to the masters. The Supreme Court ruled on it, Dred Scott decision, so I mean, got Congress who got the Supreme Court. So, as a sheriff, in the 1850s, if you're in a free state, and a slave escapes, and the southerner comes in to reclaim his property, do you give him back his property, or do you help that slave to get away?
Well, and I know the what's his name who writes the blog who used that as a great analogy. You know what? The response to one of those was, you know, when people have real discourse, then they say, here's my opinion and here's the facts behind that opinion that make me believe that. And when I don't have a good opinion with facts to back it up, then I resort to these sort of insults and imagination. So how do I answer that? It's not relevant to me because it's not a current law to me. But let me put it in these terms, and I don't know. Yeah, I'm frankly, I don't know who this guy is. I could give a crap who this guy is. I know how I feel. Today, let me put it in these terms. So 1850, so we are, we're 175-ish years, 165-ish years ahead. 165 years from now, when you look back and say, all right, now all our weapons are confiscated, what would you have done in 2013? I don't know. What I do know is the laws are built in that republic form of government. And in 1850, the laws were passed that allowed, as much as we detest it today, that allowed slaves to be considered property. And some people, just like this, had moral obligations to say, you know what, slaves aren't property. And I'm not going to defend that. And in the more northern state mentality, then they fought against that. And in the southern state mentality, then they fought for that, usually out of self-interest. So it's a great states' rights issue of what's really right or wrong. I would detest today the thought of slavery. I suspect, if it was on my side, I would morally struggle about my duty as a sheriff to uphold the law. And I would say that if I didn't think, so let's say I'm living in a southern state, I think I would give up my office and move to where I felt I was morally right. So at this time right now, if I lived in Connecticut, or well, most of the New England states support the gun control. It's another reason why I will never live there. Because I live in a state where our values are very similar, and I believe in those values. So I'm not meaning to dodge your question. I hope you don't take that I'm dodging your question, but that's how I feel. If I was the sheriff of Cook County today, and I had all of my constituents saying, you know what, we need to get these guns off the street. There's nothing but gang members are the only ones that carry a gun. Let's pass this Second Amendment. Let's pass this gun control. I don't think I can live there. I got a safe full of guns. I love my guns. I'm not giving them up.
Jim.
And if I'm taking too much.
No, you're good.
No.
This is good.
We want to.
You guys
There's lots of questions.
Well, I still have something I want to talk about.
Okay.
Well, that's fine.
Let's talk about the guns for
Yeah,
one
let's
last
talk about
question.
guns. Go ahead.
One last question there, Jim.
Well, this isn't on guns.
Oh, well, perfect.
I have a
Well,
good
well,
question, so I'll be the last one.
Okay.
Yeah, this had, correct me if I'm wrong, that the office of sheriff originated back in England way before this country ever
Correct.
existed. Is that correct?
Sheriff. Tax collector.
Sheriff. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the Declaration of Independence occurred here in this country, what, 15, 18 years before the Constitution, is that
Right.
correct? And sheriffs were already in place. So sheriffs were kind of the law of the land during that period of time when there was no Constitution.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So sheriffs were exerting, their opinions mattered. They
There
were,
was a reasonably corrupt system by today's standards.
well, they were elected.
I'm sorry?
The sheriffs were maybe not elected. Maybe they were appointed by the governor of the colonies. But then we did the Declaration of Independence, so the sheriffs were pretty much the law of the land for that 15 or 18 years. At any rate, what I'm getting to is that the Declaration says that if we have a form of government that isn't doing its job, it's our duty as citizens to alter or abolish it and to set up new safeguards for our happiness and safety. Well, so if we look at the 545 people that we now call our federal government, it's kind of like an oligarchy, if you will.
You get a little political
A
on
group-
here, aren't you?
A group, no, not really. A group by many, right? 545 out of 310 million people are running this place, or supposedly they would like to think so. I would like to think that the 3,000 sheriffs are running this place. Well, in that regard then, we have this interesting law called the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, where there's no protection for anybody, and it's already caused my premiums to go up to the point where they're almost unaffordable. Well, fine, with that in mind, the governor and the state, they're pushing real hard to put this state exchange in place where they become the enforcement arm of Obamacare. And therefore, you get involved now. You get involved in the sense that I have insurance with the insurance company. I have no need to go to any building called State Exchange to buy insurance. I go to a grocery store to buy broccoli. I go to an insurance store to buy insurance. Well, are you going to come and herd me to that State Exchange office?
Absolutely not.
It's federal law.
I don't enforce federal law, unless I want it.
Well, that's my question. Are you going to come and herd me in? Are you going to
No.
send your deputies out?
No.
Okay. And like you said, you're on my tape.
No!
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you.
It's 2 letters.
So you're going to tell the governor, I won't do it. And leave it to the governor to come and herd me in to his
He's not gonna
exchange,
do it.
if he gets it. If he gets
You know,
it.
and I won't give on too much of a tangent. I think you give the government, particularly the federal government, too much credit for being overt.
I like those words.
My thought.
Because just like California, Washington, Colorado are just saying the federal government with respect to marijuana, heck with you.
I agree. It's,
Yeah.
well, I may
What-
philosophize a little bit more.
Well, all right. So Bob,
Yes, sir.
I just have one question. Out of all the funds that you spend in your department on any given year, how much of it comes from the feds in the form of
Oh.
grants or stipends?
Good question, because that's the thing. Oh, you know, they're going to make us do it, or they're going to cut back federal funding.
Supreme Court cases, they can't.
You know, well, they found a way around that, actually. Like I said, you give them too much credit for being overt. So we probably, I would guess, so I got a $57.5 million budget. Pretty big organization, 652 people. Out of that $57.5 million, I probably get a couple $100,000. And if the federal government cuts funding today, doesn't matter. I mean, I wish I'd have it. It gets us some things. It gets us some grants. There's some passed down grants from the states that we get to do new things, figure out how to do things a little bit better. But they don't have their hooks into me, and they don't have their hooks into any other sheriff in Idaho. I'm the president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. I'm a little tired tonight because we just had an all-day meeting. We actually started yesterday at noon. We passed a letter that you'll see tomorrow about the Second Amendment, our position on the Second Amendment, which is pretty much identical to the National Sheriff's position on the Second Amendment, which is pretty much identical to my position on the Second Amendment. So it's been a sort of a long road in there, but this idea, I don't know of a law enforcement agency that is so tied into federal funding that it's really going to matter. A few years ago, they had a lot of money. The federal government, because of the economy, passes down about 1/4 of what they did 5-6 years ago. It's not that much. It's a myth.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see the video Rampant Injustice about Mountain Pure Water Company in Arkansas? Could you please look at that when you have time on the computer? It's
Mountain Pure.
22 minutes long. It's called Mountain Pure Water.
Should write it down for him.
And they were raided by some agency of the federal government. They came in with about 50 agents with guns, pointed them at the employees' heads, loaded guns, and what they were after was some sort of paperwork having to do with a FEMA loan or something like that, which they had sent them at least twice by certified mail, so they had receipts, and he has no idea why they stormed into the building like that. They held people for hours without letting them call anyone, without even letting them use the bathroom. And isn't there a law that the sheriff has to be consulted before they can carry out a raid like that? And I thought the sheriff
Curtis.
was the authority in the county. Don't they have to consult the
Local law
sheriff?
enforcement, no. Boise City, if Boise City gets a search warrant, they don't have to tell me about it. DEA gets a search warrant if the FBI gets a search warrant. We have great relationships here. I can tell you, the FBI agents I know of, the ATF agents I know of, the DEA agents I know of, they're just as passionate about this as you and I are. They're not like some cloak and dagger, jackbooted thugs. They're you and I who happen to work for the federal government.
Well,
And a
50
So
lot of
this-
us live here.
50 thugs carried out this raid.
All right, so
And-
I don't know that. I can't
Could you
speak to
send him
it.
that
But
information, Sheila?
Pardon me?
Could you send him that information, a link to that?
I've got an email,
Okay.
I'll get you his email, you can send it to me.
So,
you know, lots of times I have to deal in sort of anecdotal things about, you know, well, what about this? And I can't really speak to those. You know, there's the sort of quasi-famous ones like the dairy farm in Wisconsin with the Amish dairy farmer. You know, and that's kind of an urban legend, or not an urban legend, but kind of a legend of the injustice of government. Here, this poor dairy farmer is trying to just make a living, and then I don't know who it was, like Food and Drug or something. I don't know. I came in to do some sort of raid on his farm, and the rest of the story. I'm not saying right or wrong either way. The rest of the story was there's a government. There's two functions of government: health and public safety. He was exporting across state lines food that was a danger to the community, and he had been warned multiple times, and he continued to do it. Kind of a no-win situation in a way. The way they do it, I mean, we could argue, and I don't know the realities, but I'd rather stick on the Second Amendment that you and I can talk about here, the realities. Can the FBI do a raid here? Yeah, absolutely. You get a federal judge to sign a search warrant, they can do a raid, they don't have to check with me.
Well, so
They do.
But you can stop them.
This was a real thing. I talked to the owner. I looked it up and found the phone number. I called the company, and then the lady got the owner for me, and I talked to him for about 10, 15 minutes. And he told me all about it. And if one of them had been able to call out and call the sheriffs, would the sheriffs come out and defend them against the...
I can't speak for that.
You know, I mean, if they're looking for
Could-
documents, they're
well, Sheila, the way to ask the
they're not
question-
armed drug dealers. They're-
Sheila, the way to ask the question is, could you have put a stop to it if you wanted to?
You know, that's
It's
an odd
your
question.
county.
Here's
You're
the one.
elected by that body that controls that county, and they're federal, so.
So I'm not skirting your question. If I am bringing back on track, but I think this is more explanatory. So if the FBI gets a search warrant to come raid this business right here, the federal judge has signed that search warrant. I tell you, it's deemed pretty proper. I can't tell you, and I'm looking you in the eye, I can't tell you of a federal government injustice by the law, and we might have philosophical differences about the IRS and others, that really happens here, we can speak on.